The collision that many suspected was only a matter of time finally unfolded at the Canadian Grand Prix. McLaren's two drivers came to blows on track. It was Lando Norris who stepped up and accepted full blame right after the incident. And because he took full ownership and genuinely was at fault, the clash lacked the usual drama you'd expect from a teammate tangle. Honestly, it might have been the most uneventful intra-team crash I've seen. As for what happened, there's not a whole lot of complexity. Toward the end of the lap, Oscar Piastri made a strong, confident move into the final chicane, braking late and holding on to the lead down the main straight. Once ahead, he immediately moved over to cover the inside line into turn 1. Pretty standard defensive driving. There was never any chance he'd leave the door open, but Lando, for some reason, stayed locked in the slipstream behind Oscar, almost like he zoned out or didn't fully register the closing space. That inside line was never going to stay open, and Lando miscalculated both the proximity and the length of his car. The result? He clipped the back of Oscar's McLaren. At first glance, it didn't seem like a major impact, but the consequences were quite harsh. Lando lost his front wing, skidded into the wall, and that was the end of his race. McLaren were lucky it didn't end both of their races because Oscar managed to survive the incident and eventually brought the car home in 4th. That result spared the team some serious damage. Still, it marked their first race of the season without a podium finish. Oscar, who had already been jumped by Antonelli at the start, salvaged decent points, but this wasn't one of his stronger weekends. Oddly enough, though, he came out of it better than expected in the championship picture. While Verstappen didn't win, he finished second, and his teammate failed to score. Piastri's 4th place allowed him to increase his points lead over Lando from 10 to 22. So, while the weekend was rough, especially from a McLaren team perspective, Oscar limited the damage well, compared to the rest of the frontrunners. As we approach the midpoint of the season, there's been a notable shakeup behind McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. Mercedes have overtaken Ferrari to move into 2nd place, but let's be honest, they're still trailing McLaren by a massive 175 points. What makes the recent crash between the McLaren drivers even more ironic is the timing. My previous video was all about the dynamic between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri, wondering if a clash or rising tension was just around the corner. And then, right on cue, the Canadian Grand Prix delivered exactly that. Zach Brown and Andrea Stella have always emphasized a team-first mindset. They've been realistic about what can happen when you let two competitive drivers race freely, especially without strict team orders. Zach even acknowledged earlier in the year that a coming together between the pair was probably inevitable. So in a way, this wasn't unexpected, it was almost anticipated. What prevented the crash from spiraling into a bigger controversy, though, was how McLaren handled it. Norris immediately admitted fault, which helped cool things off. That mature response, paired with McLaren's no-blame culture, stopped the incident from overshadowing what should have been a larger discussion: the rising threat from Mercedes and Red Bull. Both rival teams showed improved pace in Canada, especially Mercedes. Kimi Antonelli qualified in the top 4 and capped his weekend with a podium finish, marking another strong statement from the Silver Arrows. Now, when looking at the bigger picture, the incident between Norris and Piastri isn't as damaging as some are making it out to be. It's not likely to derail McLaren's season or shake Piastri's momentum in the championship. The more compelling narrative here actually centers around Lando Norris. This crash highlights a recurring issue that's followed Lando from 2024 into 2025. Let's be clear, Norris is incredibly fast. He has the raw speed to fight for poles, victories, and the championship. But what continues to hold him back is his performance under pressure. It's becoming a pattern. Yet again in Q3, Lando made a critical mistake that compromised his session. That error meant he had just one final lap to deliver, and once again, when the pressure was on, he couldn't extract everything from the car. The result? A disappointing 7th place on the grid. In isolation, the crash in Canada might seem like just another racing incident. But in context, it's another symptom of Lando's ongoing struggle to perform at his best when the stakes are highest. Heading into the race, Lando Norris was already on the back foot. A disappointing qualifying performance left him out of position, and we all know how difficult it is to fight through the field at the front, especially in a tightly packed grid like this one. That crash with Piastri, in my view, wasn't just a racing incident. It was a moment born from frustration, desperation, and a complete lapse in judgment. Lando misread the slipstream, misjudged the distance, and ultimately ran into the back of his own teammate. It was a moment of mental collapse, a rare but costly lapse in concentration. And it's baffling to witness this kind of mistake from someone who, just a few races ago in Australia, looked flawless. He was the driver of the day then. Since that peak, however, things have steadily unraveled under the mounting pressure from Verstappen and Piastri. Now, to address something directly, I've been very critical of Lando Norris in the past, and I know some fans weren't happy about it. A few even labeled me a Lando hater. But the truth is, my criticism came from high expectations. Since 2021, I've consistently ranked Lando in my personal top 5 drivers each season. I've always believed in his talent, and that's exactly why his shortcomings have stood out to me so sharply. When he finally got a car capable of fighting for wins and possibly a title, I expected him to rise to the occasion. But between Miami and Las Vegas last season, he couldn't close the gap to Verstappen. He made too many mistakes in qualifying, lacked consistency at race starts, and didn't quite carry himself like a championship-caliber driver. What made it more frustrating was that he had previously talked about how easy it was for guys like Lewis and Max to win in dominant machinery. 2024 served as a reality check. He learned that having the car is only part of the equation. The rest is execution under pressure, and that's where he fell short. Coming into this year, Lando had clear areas where improvement was critical, particularly his starts. Ironically, that used to be one of his weaker points, even when he was dominating Oscar Piastri in qualifying. But 2025 is telling a different story. Oscar has taken a leap in performance from his second to third season, and that's changed the internal dynamics at McLaren. Lando, for much of his career, has thrived in an environment where the team rallied around him, especially with Zak Brown's constant praise. Zak famously said we were entering the Lando Norris era, comparing him to names like Hamilton, Senna, and Schumacher. That kind of backing has always fueled Lando. He's someone who performs well when he feels supported and admired. But Piastri's rise has disrupted that. Winning a sprint in his rookie year and a Grand Prix in just his second season, Oscar has proven he's not just a teammate, he's a rival. And Lando is starting to feel that pressure more than ever. Now, with Oscar Piastri emerging as a genuine title contender in just his third season, there's a sense that this shift has thrown Lando Norris slightly off balance. He doesn't quite seem like the same confident driver we saw when he was comfortably outperforming the likes of Daniel Ricciardo. Something has changed, and it's showing. What's most concerning is that Lando's development appears to be stalling. He burst onto the scene with raw talent, quickly matured into a dependable midfield performer, and steadily evolved into one of the sport's top 5 drivers, at least in terms of consistency and raw pace. But since being handed machinery capable of fighting for wins and titles, that upward trajectory seems to have leveled off. Compared to Oscar, who's still on an impressive upward curve, Lando looks like he's plateauing. And where he currently stands just isn't enough to mount a serious title challenge. He's not operating at his peak, and mentally, it feels like he's struggling the most. This isn't about a lack of talent. Lando clearly has the ability, but what he might need now is guidance from outside his usual support system. A seasoned voice, someone who's been there before. Whether that's a former champion like Sebastian Vettel or Nico Rosberg, having an experienced, emotionally detached figure could help Lando navigate the pressure. Not a friend, not a family member, someone who can offer the tough love and championship mindset that's required at the very top. Lando has always worn his heart on his sleeve. He's emotional, and that's not inherently negative. Some drivers thrive on it. He's also refreshingly self-aware and brutally honest about his own mistakes. That humility is admirable, but at times, he may be too self-critical, too hard on himself, and that can be just as damaging as arrogance. A voice of calm from someone who understands the mental toll of F1 could be transformative for him. Someone who knows what it's like to fail, to rebound, to win. Because right now, Lando looks like a driver who could benefit from reassurance when things aren't going his way. It's also important to point out that Lando hasn't exactly clicked with the MCL 39 this year. He made it clear early on that the car doesn't feel quite right to him. It's not giving him the feedback or the balance he wants. To McLaren's credit, they've been trying to tailor the car more toward his preferences. We saw new suspension upgrades brought to Canada, aimed at expanding the setup window to better suit Lando, without compromising the car's overall performance. But despite those efforts, the disconnect remains. His continued mistakes, whether in qualifying or race execution, suggest he still isn't comfortable behind the wheel. His engineer, Will Joseph, has even had to coach him through braking zones, which speaks volumes. This is not a driver in full command of his tools. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, Oscar Piastri is thriving. Oscar Piastri's performance this season has been consistent and composed, and that's exactly where the heart of the issue lies for Lando Norris. Back when he was up against Daniel Ricciardo, Lando still had the benefit of being the clear lead driver at McLaren. Ricciardo struggled to adapt, and there was no real internal challenge to Lando's authority or influence within the team. But with Oscar, it's a completely different dynamic. Piastri isn't just holding his own, he's excelling. He's come into Formula One and delivered the kind of maturity and racecraft you'd expect from someone who's been on the grid for half a decade, maybe more. That contrast has only highlighted Lando's own shortcomings. And in his 7th season in the sport, that comparison is starting to look uncomfortable. It's important to note this isn't about unfair criticism. It's about context. If Oscar wasn't performing at such a high level, Lando's struggles wouldn't feel quite so pronounced. But because Piastri is delivering, because he is looking like the more complete driver at times, Lando's weaknesses become more exposed. That's before we even factor Max Verstappen into the equation. When you look at the current title fight, the cold truth is this: Verstappen and Piastri are simply better than Norris right now. The standings back that up. Last season, this season, the numbers don't lie. It's evident in their wheel-to-wheel racing, their calm under pressure, and their ability to extract every ounce of performance when it counts. And for Lando, it's a tough pill to swallow, especially after years of comments about how easy it was for others like Max and Lewis to win in dominant cars. Now that he has a car capable of winning, the pressure has turned inward. The spotlight is firmly on him, and he's being judged not just by what he can do, but what he isn't doing, compared to those around him. Right now, Lando needs a reset, mentally and structurally. Whether that means seeking guidance from someone outside his usual circle, maybe a former world champion who understands the psychological grind of Formula One, or digging deeper within the team to adapt the car more to his liking, something has to change. Because while the opportunity to fight for a world title is still there, he is, at this moment, not driving like someone capable or deserving of becoming world champion. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed the breakdown, don't forget to hit subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.